Welcome, my friends, to our final study for Q1. Pretty much today, we're going to have a big wrap up for the PMP exam. I know lots of you are getting ready and you're studying the people, process, and business domains. You're probably even studying the PMP exam immersion book. Now, if you haven't seen the PMP exam immersion book, I have to show it to you. You know, the PMP exam is such that there are so many moving parts and there's a book that puts it all together. It's called PMP Exam Immersion. It's broken into people, process, and business. And what I hear from a lot of people is that the process domain is the part that people find difficult. But just yesterday, I was reading a post by someone who had taken the exam and was lamenting that they passed the process and business domain and failed the people domain. So I don't want to take it for granted that everyone knows the people domain. So what we're going to do today is very rapidly go over the top of the waves for all the domains. But when it comes to the process domain, I want to go pretty deep into the process domain and remind you of what you need to study for it. So this is going to be twofold. Number one, I'm going to show you how to study for the exam. And number two, we're going to go into the process domain. I'm going to make this available to the community for free at this time, right? So at this time, I have a study guide, a study plan, I should say, a study plan that is going to help people get ready for the exam, including yourselves. And this is a 30-day plan. It's pretty aggressive. So, in the 30-day plan, it starts off giving you a high level overview of the books that are involved, and it gets into week one, managing conflict. So if you're getting ready for the exam, you need to understand in managing conflict this AACCC. What do we mean by that? Avoid, accommodate, compromise, collaborate, force or direct, right? So you need to avoid or withdraw, accommodate or smooth, collaborate or problem solve, compromise or reconcile, force or direct. So I've got a breakdown of how you need to be thinking for each task, and I'm not going to dwell on it because it's a lot of text. Instead, after this session, I am going to send this to you, and this is going to form the base for all of your studying in a month. So I've broken it down into people, process, and business, but I have the tasks numbered like in the immersion book for chapter one, chapter two, all the way to chapter 35 because there are 35 tasks. So that's the first part of this presentation is to remind you that I've got you covered as far as studying for the exam. Okay, that's part one. All right, part two is now going into the specific tasks without looking at too much text, just so that you can focus your attention on each domain and each task. So I'll send you this study guide when we get done with the meeting. But for now, let's jump into the people, process, and business domain just to get our minds clear. And I will call out certain things that you need to have studied and perfected your act on before the exam. All right, here we go. So, your PMP exam, as you've always heard me say, is broken down into people, process, and business. Here's the people domain. Now let's think as critically as possible. There's a philosophy for the people domain that I want to go over before we talk about all the tasks. Here's the philosophy. For your exam, you need to think as follows. The customer. This is your primary goal. Their success is your primary goal. You need to think about advancing the work with the customer. So if the customer has an issue, don't say, oh, that's nothing to worry about. That is not a concern. No, you got to work with them to make them feel heard and to move the project forward. You got to be fair, treat others fairly. You got to be a good steward of the resources entrusted to you. They use the word fiduciary, right, in the PMBOK 6. So a 7, you got to be a fiduciary of those resources. Then you got to focus on the team health and the well-being of the team. Then you got to trust the team, right? Number 7, you got to be a good servant leader. You got to be a diversion shield to protect the team from interruptions, unnecessary interruptions. Number 8, you got to be a mentor and a coach. Serve and guide the team. Any options that ask you to punish the team, you know those are not the right option to choose. Number 9, integrity. Do not abuse your position or title or be partial in your actions. This is what is going to guide your answers on the exam. Number 10, be honest and truthful, even if it may offend the stakeholders. Be honest. Number 11, be courageous as a leader, right? And number 12, be agile and adapt to be resilient. These are mindsets. Now, these mindsets are going to underpin the people domain that we're going to look at right now. Number 1, manage conflict. To get this one down pat, my friends, you need to remember PMI's approach to conflict in a lot of their literature. It's from the Thomas Kalman conflict mode instrument. As I said, compromise, reconcile, force direct, collaborate, problem solve, accommodate or smooth, avoid or withdraw, all that stuff. And then there are little words that help you know which one is which. Retreat or postpone is avoid. Emphasizing areas of agreement and conceding is smoothing. Temporal satisfaction is compromise or reconcile. Force or direct is used in an emergency. Enforced through a power position. These are words to be familiar with. Collaborator problem solve is multiple viewpoints being brought to the table and spending time to really absorb what the other person is saying. Then, number 2 is lead a team, task 2. When it comes to this task, for you to obliterate it on the exam, you need to have the following mindsets. Number 1, you got to understand leadership is all about influence, right? Leadership is not the same as position. You could have a position that begins the leadership, but in order to be a great leader, you need to transcend the position. So you need to have a clear vision, support diversity, value servant leadership, and be a situational leader. Now, out of what I said, there are two things. One, be a servant leader. Understand the 10 tenets of servant leadership by Robert Greenleaf. Being a listener, active listening, empathy, understanding the team needs to heal. The team might go through a tough time, or an individual on the team goes through a tough time. It's that understanding that people need to heal. It's being aware of how the team is feeling, being able to lead by persuasion, not by carrot and sticks. Conceptualization, seeing the big picture, foresight, having that intuition to know what might be happening in advance. Stewardship, being a fiduciary, commitment to the growth of people. Have you ever seen someone that is wildly obsessed with you growing? That's what we're talking about. And then building community. So you need to go a little bit deeper in the immersion book to understand these. The other one that you need to read in the immersion book, because it goes deep, is situational leadership. The situational leadership model of direct, coach, support, delegate. You need to know when to be each. This is talked about in depth in the book. And then you also need to understand the Tuckman's ladder, the 5 stages of team development. Why don't we like adjourning? Why don't we like that in the world of agile? What happens when you bring a new person in? So you got to understand forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. You got to get those down pat. Going over to number three, support team performance. It's a posture to help your team grow by understanding that KPIs can help you observe their performance, but then you got to give them feedback on the KPIs and you got to steer them in the right direction. So, as far as understanding a process in PMBOK, this is managed team. And if you are uncomfortable with managed team, the process, yeah, you got to go read managed team because this is managed team through and through. In the world of Agile, we do it differently, all right? The way we relate to the team is going to be different. We look at the team as adults and there's more autonomy typically. And the mindset for managed team, it has a bend to it. I want to remind you about what our buddy Roy said about this. I'm going to bring Roy's video on for a few moments and let's just listen just to give us that agile dose for the day. Let's listen to our buddy Roy. Here we go.
So these are all valid, agile or traditional, whatever. It's all about building better team members and better teams. It, keep in mind, though, also that when we're in an agile environment, we're trying to build a team, not just team members. So those KPIs need to be not just about the individual performance of that person, but also about how they're performing as a team member. Are they supporting the other team members in the team goals? Are they putting the team members above their own performance goals? Things like that. And it's really important for us to try to build that culture and that structure of focusing on not just the individual, but how that individual interacts with others within their team. Now it's also so let's bring up the story of metrics. This is one of my favorite stories. We want to make sure that when we're looking at KPIs that we're measuring things the right way and they're measuring the right things. Because if you don't, then you're going to have some real challenges. One of my favorite stories is a team that I was working with. Great team, fantastic, really working well together, not just as individuals, but as team members. So this was a software team. They had a collection of developers and a collection of testers. And the testers, when you're trying to get to that kind of a team, the testers work with the developers as they're building things to validate and to verify that what they are building while they're building it. So it's not an after approach. It's not a phase. It's as things are being constructed, we're verifying it along the way and making sure that it's good, high quality stuff as it's being built. And that way, if something is detected as it's being built, we correct it right there on the spot. So we don't identify a defect after the fact. We fix it right there. So no defects get created, right? We're preventing defects, which is a much more effective team, highly efficient to do that. Well, the challenge is this group of testers, they were a vendor, and there was a metric in their contract that said that they were being graded on how many defects they found. So the challenge is they were preventing defects from ever happening, which is the encouraged behavior. But since they were being measured on how many were found, they were actually viewed as a bad team, right? Very effective, but they were being rated inappropriately. So what the side effect was that the team members, the developers in this case, they really respected their testers. They were partners, and they said, "Look, here's what we're going to do: just create some bogus defects, and we'll record them and fix them right away. They don't have to be real. That way, you get rated as being better, and it's not really causing any harm for us." Well, that's a negative behavior, right? That's extra overhead on the team that's unnecessary. So when you're defining your KPIs, make sure you're measuring the right stuff for the right reasons. Everything you measure should be to encourage the correct behaviors. Don't just measure and assume that it's the right thing. Watch out for those KPIs because it can really get in the way. Back to you, Phill.
Good stuff from Roy. So this is going to help you in the process domain, the KPIs. You don't want vanity metrics. There's some metrics that are inherently useless. I mean, they measure something, but in the wrong way. In this case, number of defects found. Yeah, but it encouraged bad behaviors. So when you think about the managed team process, you got to think about it more critically, especially in an agile realm, because what behaviors do you want to evoke from these metrics you're collecting or that you're stressing? So it all has to be both in an agile spirit and also in the spirit of hybrid as well. You got to always think, in fact, for your PMP exam, I would rather you thought hybrid at all times than you just thought only agile or only predictive because they combine this stuff a lot. In fact, I hear that they combine this stuff up to 70% in some people's exams. All right, let's move quicker now. Empower team members and stakeholders means give them some autonomy, give them that task accountability. Number five, ensure team members and stakeholders are adequately trained. This is really the develop team process. In the world of Agile, we have something called a skills marketplace where we cross train, we job shadow, we do pair programming, right? We do team pairing. Number six, build a team. Again, you got to think about Tuckman's ladder. Foreman, Storman, Norman, everyone's trying to be on their good behavior in the beginning. But what is going to help you is to have a team charter, some sort of social contract. Number seven, address and remove impediments, obstacles, and blockers for the team. How does the scrum master or the servant leader know about these impediments? The daily scrum, the daily stand up meeting, but that's not all. They could be brought in at any time. So if we don't focus our time on removing the team's impediments, they will be impeded. That's the whole point of impediments, right? To impede. We have impediments that slow you down. We have obstacles that you can go over, but what a waste of time. And blockers you can't even move. All these three, they're your enemies. So you want to go after them as vehemently as possible. Number eight, negotiate project agreements. A lot of people forget that the PMI's world has got contract types. You need to understand your fixed price, your cost reimbursable, your time and material, and that is just one part of negotiating. You could negotiate anything on a project, and this is just positioning you to understand negotiating as a strategy, to actually think win win, not win lose, not I win, you lose. No, you should think win win. It's a mindset. Number nine, collaborate with stakeholders. When you're collaborating, you need to come into the project right out of the gate, asking the question level of power, level of interest. What does it look like? Level of interest is low, level of power is low, monitor. Level of power is high, level of interest is low, keep satisfied. Someone's got high level of power and interest, manage them close. And if someone has a high level of interest but low level of power, keep informed. It's a strategy, it's a mindedness. The same thing for when you get into the planning aspect. You want to be intentional about your stakeholders. So, the stakeholder engagement assessment matrix I was quizzing you about last week, yeah, you should know how this works. C for current, D for desired. The question is, what do I need to do to move my stakeholder from current to desired? What do I need to do? And all of these actions, these are things you and your team are going to strategize. Okay, this is what we could do to move this stakeholder from being unaware to being more supportive. Or maybe you even want them to be in a leading role. Desired and current aligns. Great. Keep it that way. All the things you need to do to keep that person aligned, to keep them focused so that you keep them in a leading role. Those are the things you want to think about. All right, moving on. The next one we have is building a shared understanding. This is where you have your retrospectives. This is where you have your dailies. You know, we talk about the daily scrum syncing everyone together, right? So your daily scrum, the two ways of doing it. I asked you about this last week. Chat into me if you remember the two ways to conduct a daily scrum. Just put it in the chat. Two concepts. Okay, let me continue. Why you chat that in. So part of a daily scrum quagmire could be what do you do if the team is geographically dispersed? That's why you have tools that you can use for your daily scrum, right? Thank you, Mark. Mark got the second one, which is the one I was interested in. It's not just the three questions, it's walking the board. Thank you, Mark. Good job. So when you're walking the board, you could also do this going over to task 11 virtually, right? I want you to think about conducting a daily scrum virtually. You could. And you need the tools, and you can use Zoom, and you can use Miro, and you can use Jira, and you could just share the screen, but you could still do walk the board, right? And don't forget the Elmo concept. Enough. Let's move on. It's a good concept to use. Not that it's coming out on your exam, but when someone is freewheeling and going too far, you hold up the Elmo doll to remind them. Let's move on. All right, number 12, define team ground rules. Speaking of Elmo, that could be a ground rule. There's some other things that we could have as ground rules. How many people talk at once? One person. Who goes first? The person who's on the agenda. If there's sidebar stuff, let's take it offline. Don't come late to meetings and so on. This could be in your social contract, your team contract, and so on. All right, moving on to number 13, mentor. You got to mentor people. Makes sense. And number 14, promote team performance through the application of EI. I often tell people before you exam, get familiar with these terminologies, right? Sensing, intuition, extroversion, introversion. And this is a little trivia. I'm going to show the answer. So, prefers to work out ideas with others. Who is that? Or prefers to observe than be the center of attention. So if this was on the exam, the exercise would be to match this with something else, right? It would be this, right? And then the second one, it would be to match, prefers to observe. This would be your introvert. So you would match that with that. And the ones that always throw people off are the sensing and the intuition. But the dreamer is the person who imagines. So this should always remind you of which one is intuition. It's the dreamer, the one who likes to imagine. And I'm not saying this is coming out on the exam, but being familiar with the concepts, someone who is literal is what they are sensing right now. So, things like this, you want to study them in the book. They are in the immersion book. Okay? Good deal. All right, my friend. So that concludes it as far as the people domain. Now we're going to the domain that a lot of people have concerns about. The domain that a lot of people have concerns about is the process domain. Boom, process. Let me rapidly give you the lay of the land of process. And I want to take it from the way PMI has it and put it more in logical order and explain. Okay? So let's do this. Okay, starting here. The very first thing you could think about is actually task 13. When do I use agile? When do I use predictive? When do I use hybrid? Right here. Number one, know your Stacy model and be able to explain it. And then number two, put a layer of better understanding of predictive, iterative, incremental, and agile. Predictive and iterative, single delivery. Incremental and agile, frequent deliveries. All of them, apart from predictive, they have dynamic requirements. But when it comes to incremental, we only do it one time per iteration. So understanding these and the continuum of life cycles is important. Also remembering that agile could be iteration based agile and flow based agile. You need to have that down pat. So this first one, I know it looks like, oh, it's just a sentence. No, it's loaded. So if you haven't read the agile practice guide, that's another to do. Read the agile practice guide and get that aspect down pat because that was page 19. Okay? You got to know this and you got to know this. Otherwise, PMI is going to take their soccer ball and go home because they want you to play with this stuff. Know it. Okay. The next thing on my roadmap here, out of the regular order, is establishing project governance. What is governance? I've asked you this question before, so I won't waste time. Governance is a framework within which authority is exercised. So you, as a project manager, as a project leader, you need to establish a governance structure. What authority are we going to give the team? What are the bounds of the project manager's authority? That has to be explained and decided on. Number nine, integrate project planning activities. If I was going to give you an image for integrating project planning activities, it would be showing all of those subsidiary plans coming together to give you one big master project management plan. Because this one right here, let's zoom into it. This one right here, number nine, when we talk about integrating project planning activities, you have project plans that we call subsidiary plans, scope management plan, requirements management plan, schedule management plan, cost management plan, quality, and so on. But we also have baseline, scope baseline, schedule baseline, right? All those baselines and plans, you need to integrate them, ensuring that if one part is affected by an event, the others reflect it. So you got to get that stuff down. Task 17, plan and manage project or phase closure or transitions. We always say that in the world of agile, you should be ready to close at any time because you close out a sprint and you move to the next one. And the next sprint does not have to happen before you close out the endeavor. Management could say, you know what, we have enough value. But in the world of predictive, you need to understand the transitions that happen. What does a transition look like? It's in the immersion book. It's in the book. We spend so much time talking about task 17 in the book, and I'm just going to read a little bit of it for you because PMI, they like their closing domain, which is going to be chapter 31 in this book. Always ready to close, always ready to move on. But in the world of predictive, when you are closing out a project to a phase, the final report, you don't want to compromise that final report. You don't want to compromise the final transition, and you don't want to compromise the collation of all the lessons learned. Let's read it. This task acknowledges the importance of planning how to transition from phase to phase on a project, or how to transition the outputs of a project to the next responsible team to assume ownership of the project deliverables. There are a few things that you want to be aware of in closing out. We want the financials to be closed out, the legal and administrative closure. We want to transfer ownership of deliverables. We want to share the final project report. We want to collate lessons learned. We want to archive project documents. And we want to obtain feedback from relevant stakeholders using appropriate tools and techniques. So there's a lot of stuff that happens in closing that you really need to hammer down on. Okay. Moving on from here to our next area. Again, out of order. We're moving on to task 8, plan and manage scope. The things you want to remember here, the WBS, the WBS dictionary, and the project scope statement, those are big. You also want to remember your requirements traceability matrix and what it is, requirements documentation, what it is, and then the whole narrative of control accounts, work packages, planning packages. These are things to firm up. Number 6, plan and manage schedule. Define activities, sequencing the activities, estimating the durations, developing the schedule, slack, float, leads, lags, that kind of thing. You got to get good. Crashing and fast tracking are terminologies that you want to remember. Let's zoom into this one. This is plan and manage budget and resources. Your earned value core metrics, SPI, CPI, CV, and SV. When it comes to resources, I just say know your 6 processes in resource management: plan resource management, estimate activity resources, acquire resources, develop team, manage team, control resources. That's task 5 right there. Okay. Things in task five, apart from earned value, when it comes to the resource aspect, you got to remember your conflict resolution approaches, which we've already looked at, understanding what team building is doing. It's really developing the team and understanding that you may need to liaise with internal hiring managers for resources. So all those interpersonal skills come to play. Going over to the next one, this is manage quality of products and deliverables. There is so much you need to be aware of here. It's all in the immersion book, but you need to be aware of quality audits, the difference between that and quality control, which is inspection, the concept of quality reports, quality metrics, quality checklists, quality control measurements. These are concepts to be familiar with. And of course, Six Sigma, just understanding what it is, 99.9997% efficiency and accuracy. You need to understand that as well. Going over to task three, assess and manage risks. You got to understand, avoid, transfer, escalate, accept, mitigate. You got to understand qualitative and quantitative risk analysis, and then you got to understand the easy mnemonic for enhance, accept, share, exploit, escalate for the positive risks. So there's quite a lot. I know I'm going over it a little bit quick, but if any of the terms that I've mentioned make you scratch your head, open the book. And then prompt lists. Understand that concept of prompt lists for risk, idea, and generation. All right. Task 11, plan and manage procurement. So your cost reimbursable, your fixed price, your time and material contracts, know those well. Understand the process of procurement. Starts off with planning what to procure and then goes into the contract being signed, yada, yada. Then we finally get to task one. Now we can talk about executing the project with urgency to deliver business value. Okay. Moving over to task 16, ensure knowledge transfer for project continuity. Ensure that you're touching base with the team, having the sync up meetings in the dailies, and of course, whenever you need to have some sidebar meetings, have them. But ensure that as you're moving from one project to a new project, get that person who is the expert to speak to whatever they have experienced on the project and transfer the knowledge so that the project can move. You know, I was on this project and there was this singular guy who knew everything, and it always made me nervous what's going to happen if he left. Thank goodness he stayed till the end. But things like that. All right, number 15, manage project issues, have an issue log. Number 10, manage project changes. Just as a reminder, this concept is very important for your exam. Understanding the flow of changes. Somebody asks you for a verbal request, you must put it in formal writing and log it in the change log. And PMI also wants you to analyze the change request with the project team, not alone, not in isolation. And they want you to take that recommendation and bring it into a bigger meeting with the change control board if there is one. The change control board will analyze it and they'll decide the outcome, and then they'll document the outcome back into that same change log, and the change log will be shared, and the project manager and the team will carry out that change request if the change request was approved. But if the change control board needs more information or they want to negotiate with the requester, then they're going to do that. They're going to get more information, and then the CCB may also need to include the customer and the sponsor if they were not initially in the CCB. And then all that information is going to funnel back, and ultimately, there's going to be an overarching approve, reject, on hold, or pending idea. Okay? So, this is how you need to think about change requests in PMI's world. Of course, in Agile, it works differently, but this is the mindedness you need for the exam. Okay? Moving on to the next one here, we have task 12. Let's zoom into task 12. Task 12 says manage project artifacts. There's a wide variety of artifacts in the world of project management. You have plans, you have baselines. The WBS, in some instances, they're looking at that as an artifact, right? The WBS dictionary. But in the world of Agile, we look at three things in Scrum: the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the increment. But there are other things in Agile that are artifacts as well. We look at information radiators, we look at Kanban boards, and things like that as artifacts too. Let's move on to number two, manage communications. It's very straightforward. You got to plan what to communicate, then you got to communicate it, and then you got to monitor to make sure your plan is indeed working. Speaking of communications, my friends, all throughout the life of the project, we communicate. I want you to think about this. Let's go to that favorite page. How do we process all of these aspects? The 49 processes. How do you do them? Do you do them by just creating documents? No. Information is at the hub. This thing right here, this is how we do everything. Think about it. Everything we do on this chart is all here. It's stemming from how we communicate. Because whether it's in a meeting, whether it's in a document, whether it's in a brainstorming session, this process, managed communication, is at the hub. This fuels all of the knowledge areas. How are you able to integrate communication? How are you able to scope communication? How are you able to be on the same page in schedule communication? And that's why we always say the project manager spends 70 to 90% of the time communicating. So communications is key. It is the lifeblood. Without it, just go home because nothing's going to happen. Here's our final one for process. The final one for process is engage stakeholders. And engaging stakeholders means bringing them in at the right time, keeping them engaged. I'm giving you two challenges. Challenge number one, know this table. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. I gave you a challenge over 4 weeks ago. Accept the challenge, be able to do it. If you cannot do this, you're not ready. And, some people are like, well, I passed the exam and I didn't have to do it. Well, as an instructor, you're not ready. Why do I say that? Because so many people have said, Phil, if only I knew this table, I would have done better. So I've stopped telling people it's optional. And I'm like, it's like asking, well, do I need to do potty training? Yes. Yes. But I'm five. You should still do your potty training if you don't know how to use the potty, my friend. In my mind, this is a diaper training for project managers taking the PMP exam. You got to know your 49. This is the basic. Just know it. Understand what is happening in each one. Google Phil's PMP cheat sheet. If you don't know what each one is, know what each one is. I have like a one liner on my cheat sheet to help people master this. The second challenge I'm going to give you is to understand the frameworks for your exam. What are the frameworks for your exam? Well, at a macro level, you got to understand how the project charter interrelates with identification of stakeholders, development of the plan, executing of the plan, managing the knowledge, closing the project, monitoring the project, controlling the quality, and validating the scope. Now, when you understand this, it brings everything together. I call it my main line. Now, this isn't from the PMI, this is from me. But you got to understand the project charter feeds the identification of stakeholders, the project charter feeds the development of the project management plan, the project management plan feeds the execution of the work. The execution of the work gives you a deliverable which feeds controlling quality. If it passes the quality test, then it goes to the customer for inspection. All along the project, you're doing the monitoring and controlling of the project work. Managed project knowledge is fed from a deliverable as well as other areas. And ultimately, you're going to close out your project or phase. You're going to end up getting that deliverable being accepted, being transitioned, and that's the flow. But in order to be more precise, I challenge you to Google PMP exam mainline because it will show you the intricate details. So let's go to the intricate details as a reminder. The project manager works with the sponsor, they develop a charter, it feeds the identification of stakeholders and a stakeholder register. The charter also feeds the development of the project management plan. The project management plan feeds the directing of the project work and the monitoring and controlling of the work. The project management plan feeds all integration, monitoring, and controlling processes. The project management plan also feeds managed project knowledge and it feeds all processes in the 49 except two, which is the development of the project charter and the development of the plan itself. But the project management plan feeds closing the project or phase, it feeds the controlling of quality, as the work is being done, you're going to get work performance data from direct to managed project work, and you're going to get deliverables. Now, those deliverables, they need to be checked in control quality. And part of anything in monitoring and controlling is you getting work performance information. This feeds monitor and control project work. The verified deliverables just means these jokes on the conveyor belt who are meant to be checking the work, yeah, they checked the deliverable and they said it's good to go to the customer. It goes to the customer checks out the deliverable, the customer says, fantastic, it works. Then you transition it. It becomes an accepted deliverable if the customer is happy. And then we do a final product, service, or result transition to the customer. But don't forget, there's a final report that we could write. And also remember that all of those monitoring and controlling processes, they give you work performance information, and that is used in monitor and control project work to create work performance reports. Those work performance reports, they're used when the change control board is deciding on change requests. So there's a lot of intentional feedback looping. The change requests, they come from a number of places, but this is also reminding you that performing a graded change control has change requests coming in. The work performance reports are used to decide whether to approve or reject the change requests. Also, remember that work performance data comes from direct to managed project work. This data is what becomes the information that eventually becomes the report. So, if you wanted to keep your eye on the minutia that is happening here, I wanted people to see that WPD, work performance data, becomes WPI. You see that green arrow? It's traveling to become the work performance information, which means you've analyzed the data in the lens of all the knowledge areas, and you have WPI that pertains to the various knowledge areas. It gets put into monitor and control project work, and then you weed it and distill it and compile it into reports. And this, my friends, is what I call the PMBOK Guide mainline. This is what every PMP student should know as a big picture. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't know it, but now you know it, and you can actually find a video about the PMBOK Guide mainline online if you just Google PMBOK Guide mainline. So I need you to know this. And the final thing I'm going to leave you with that I would like for you to know after I show you this, because you can actually take a screenshot and you can see if you can remember. It's like a little trivia game. Do I remember what those question marks are? Number one, two, three, four, five, six, seven. So that maybe you take a screenshot of this and you can practice offline. I'm going to put this video up on YouTube eventually. So if you're not able to take a screenshot now, don't worry. But if you can, take a screenshot, print it out, try to remember the main line. Go through the logic. It is going to help you. All right. Finally, you got to know your Scrum framework, the 353. That's it. Okay. In closing, For the business domain, it's so straightforward. You've got four things: the compliance, you got to manage it, you got to deliver value, benefits and value, you got to evaluate the value, then you got to deliver it. You got to address the external business environment changes because they're doing all sorts of stuff with AI. You got the crazy robots Elon is building. You got Stargate that Trump is talking about. You got the open AI boys doing their thing. Of course, it's going to affect a number of projects. So take a look at what's happening in the business environment and let it reflect on your scope as needed. Task four, support organizational change. It just makes sense. Why wouldn't you? You got to support the change with your project, and the organization will support you. And my friends, with that said, I want to remind you one more time, give yourself a 30-day window. Use my study plan. I'm going to put that link somewhere. I'm going to send it to you folks on the call when we get off. And just use the immersion plan to study intentionally. Some days is one task, other days is two tasks. But I want you to get this done so you can move on to bigger and more important things. All right. Thank you very much. I will go ahead and stop the recording for now. And as there are questions, let me know. But hey, if you need a book to help you amp up your studying, it's the immersion because this mirrors the exam. You might waste your time reading PMBOK 6, PMBOK 7, Agile Guide repeatedly without putting it together. I'm not saying those are bad books. They're okay, but that's not what your exam is based on. So really get good with the people, process, business domain. PMPdoctor.com is where you can get the quizzes for each task and then the mock exams. The repetition is going to help you. But I want to also stress fix a date. Well, even if it's 2 months out, fix a date on that calendar. Otherwise, we're going to be here in June planning when you're going to take the test. No, I don't want that. I want you to take it before then. Honestly, 30 days for you folks who've been through training, it's enough. I'll get off my soapbox. Thank you very much. I look forward to hearing great news of your success.